Imagine yourself standing in the scorching heat of southern Iraq, surrounded by nothing but endless sand dunes and the occasional ancient mound that rises mysteriously from the desert floor. The temperature is well above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and the sun beats down mercilessly on this seemingly barren landscape. Yet beneath your feet lies one of the greatest mysteries in human history. A civilization so advanced, so impossibly sophisticated, that even today, nearly a century after brilliant scholars like Samuel Noah Kramer first began deciphering their clay tablets, we still struggle to understand how they achieved what they did. You're holding a clay tablet in your hand, one that has been buried for more than 4,000 years. As you gently brush away the sand with a soft brush, strange wedge-shaped symbols emerge from the ancient clay. Each mark tells an astonishing story that challenges everything we thought we knew about human civilization. These are not random scratches or primitive doodles. They are sophisticated symbols representing the world's first writing system. They contain mathematical equations that rival modern calculations, astronomical observations that would not be rediscovered until the Renaissance, and mythological stories that feel eerily familiar to anyone who has read the Bible or studied ancient literature. This is exactly what happened to Samuel Noah Kramer and countless other archaeologists who entered ancient Mesopotamia in the 19th and early 20th centuries. What they discovered there would shake the foundations of our understanding of human history and leave us with questions that remain unanswered to this day. They were one of the most mysterious civilizations ever recorded in history. The Sumerians appeared almost suddenly around 3500 BC with a fully developed civilization that included gigantic cities, complex irrigation systems, advanced mathematics, sophisticated astronomy, organized religion, and engineering abilities that would not be matched for thousands of years. How did they suddenly discover agriculture capable of supporting 80,000 people in a single city? How did they develop writing systems complex enough to record everything from epic poetry to international trade agreements? How did they achieve such deep mathematical mastery with their base 60 system that we still use today to measure time and angles? How did they create engineering projects so sophisticated that modern experts are still trying to understand the techniques used to build them? Were they guided by a superior intelligence? Were they taught by beings with advanced knowledge, as they themselves constantly claimed in their own texts? Or were our ancestors simply far more brilliant than we give them credit for? These questions have troubled researchers for more than a century, and the latest archaeological discoveries have only deepened the mystery. Today we will dive deep into the world of the Sumerians. We'll explore not just what they accomplished, but also the disturbing questions their achievements raise about the true origins of human civilization. We'll examine the groundbreaking work of Samuel Noah Kramer, who devoted his life to unraveling their secrets. And we'll look at the latest discoveries that continue to baffle archaeologists and historians around the world. Let me tell you a story that sounds like it was ripped from an adventure movie, but is entirely real. The year was 1850, and the place was a desolate mound in northern Iraq called Kuyunjik, near the modern city of Mosul. An English archaeologist named Austin Henry Layard was leading an excavation team in search of evidence of the Assyrians mentioned in the Bible. Layard was a remarkable character, part diplomat, part adventurer, part scholar, who had convinced the British Museum to fund his expedition into the largely unexplored heart of the Ottoman Empire. After months of digging with limited success, Layard and his team made a discovery that would change our understanding of human history forever. Deep in the sand and rubble, they uncovered room after room filled with clay tablets. Not just a few dozen, thousands of them, all covered in mysterious wedge-shaped writing that no living person could read. The tablets had once been stacked on wooden shelves that had long since decayed. What remained were orderly piles of clay documents scattered across the floor of the rooms that had once formed the greatest library of the ancient world. This was the library of King Ashurbanipal, who ruled the Assyrian Empire in the 7th century BC. Ashurbanipal was obsessed with collecting knowledge and had sent scribes throughout his empire to copy every important text they could find. His library contained the accumulated wisdom of ancient Mesopotamia, stretching back thousands of years. Epic poems, scientific treatises, religious texts, historical chronicles, medical manuals, astronomical charts, and administrative records documenting every aspect of ancient life. But this is where the story becomes truly interesting. When scholars in the late 1800s and early 1900s began the painstaking process of deciphering these tablets, they discovered something that should have been impossible. Mixed in among the Assyrian and Babylonian texts, written in languages related to Hebrew and Arabic, were much older documents written in a completely different language, a language that preceded all known civilizations and was not related to any known language family. The writing system was cuneiform, the same wedge-shaped script used by later Mesopotamian civilizations. But the language itself was entirely unknown. It had a complex grammar unlike anything scholars had seen before, with verb forms and grammatical structures that seemed impossibly sophisticated for such an ancient tongue. Even more astonishing, many of these mysterious texts dealt with advanced mathematical concepts, detailed astronomical observations, and complex theological ideas that seemed far too sophisticated for their apparent age. This was our first glimpse of the Sumerians, a people whom history had completely forgotten. No classical writer mentioned them by name, not Herodotus, the father of history, not Pliny the Elder with his encyclopedic knowledge, not even the authors of the Bible who knew so much about the peoples of the ancient Near East. They had been so thoroughly erased from human memory that their very existence had become almost mythical. Samuel Noah Kramer, the brilliant linguist who would spend his entire career studying this mysterious people, put it best. The very name Sumer had been erased from the mind and memory of man for more than 2,000 years. The discovery of the Sumerians and their language came completely unexpectedly and was not anticipated at all. But the discovery of the Sumerians was only the beginning of the mystery. As more tablets were translated and more archaeological sites were excavated, it became clear that these were not just another ancient civilization. The Sumerians were something unprecedented in human history, a people who somehow achieved in a few centuries what should have taken thousands of years of gradual development. Samuel Noah Kramer was not just any scholar. He was a man whose life would be defined by a single obsession. Born in 1897 in Philadelphia to a family of Russian Jewish immigrants, Kramer grew up in a home where learning was everything. His family had fled pogroms in Eastern Europe, bringing little with them except a devotion to education and a belief that knowledge could overcome any obstacle. Kramer discovered his calling almost by accident in the 1920s, while he was a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania. While studying classical languages and literature, he was asked to help catalog some clay tablets that had recently arrived at the University Museum. These tablets, covered in cuneiform writing, had been sitting in storage for years because no one at the university could read them. But something about these ancient symbols spoke to Kramer in a way that Greek and Latin never had. "I felt," he later wrote, "as if I were looking at the dawn of human thought itself." These tablets contained the first attempts by human beings to record their thoughts, dreams, and attempts to understand the world around them. It was like finding the childhood diary of the human race. Kramer threw himself into the study of cuneiform with an intensity that astonished his professors and worried his friends. He spent up to 18 hours a day in the museum basement, carefully examining each tablet under a magnifying glass. He made detailed drawings of every symbol and slowly began to reconstruct the grammar and vocabulary of this ancient language. He first taught himself Akkadian and Babylonian, since these languages were better understood. Then he used that knowledge as a stepping stone to approach the much older and more mysterious Sumerian texts. The work was incredibly difficult and frustrating. With modern languages, you can rely on dictionaries and grammar books. Cuneiform had to be deciphered symbol by symbol, word by word. Each tablet was like a piece of a giant puzzle, and Kramer had to understand not only what individual symbols meant, but also how they related to one another and what they revealed about Sumerian grammar, culture, and thought. But Kramer was what we might call a linguistic detective of extraordinary talent. He developed techniques for analyzing cuneiform that are still used today. He learned to recognize subtle differences between symbols that looked almost identical to understand how the same word might be written differently in different periods, and to reconstruct the meaning of damaged or incomplete tablets by comparing them with similar texts. More importantly, Kramer realized that these tablets were not just antiquarian curiosities. They were windows into a lost world that could teach us fundamental things about human civilization. He came to understand that the Sumerians were not just another ancient people. They were the inventors of civilization. Everything we take for granted in modern society, writing, cities, schools, laws, medicine, mathematics, astronomy, began with the Sumerians. As Kramer delved deeper into their world through decades of painstaking translation, he began to uncover things that deeply unsettled him. The Sumerians possessed knowledge and capabilities that seemed impossible for people living over 5,000 years ago. Their understanding of mathematics was so advanced that they developed concepts that would not be rediscovered until the modern era. Their astronomical observations were so accurate that they mapped the movements of the planets with a precision not matched until the invention of the telescope. Their medical knowledge was so sophisticated that they performed surgical procedures that would not be attempted again until the 19th century. Kramer spent more than 60 years trying to understand how this could be possible. He translated thousands of tablets, wrote dozens of books and hundreds of scholarly articles, and trained a generation of students who continued his work. Yet even at the end of his long career, he admitted that the fundamental questions about the Sumerians remained unanswered. "In my later years," he wrote, "the more I learned about them, the more mysterious they became. Every tablet I translated revealed new abilities, new knowledge, new achievements that pushed the boundaries of what should have been possible for people of their time. These were not primitive people slowly groping their way toward civilization. They were sophisticated thinkers who understood principles of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering that we are still struggling to fully grasp today." Let me paint a picture of what the ancient world looked like around 3,500 BC, when the Sumerians built their first great cities. Most of humanity still lived in small villages scattered across the landscape. People survived as farmers and shepherds. The largest settlements rarely exceeded a few hundred people. Technology was limited to simple stone and wooden tools. The wheel had not yet been invented. There was no writing. The idea of organized government did not exist. Most people spent their entire lives within a few miles of where they were born. And then, almost overnight in historical terms, the Sumerians built Uruk. Uruk was not just a city. It was a marvel of urban planning and engineering that would not be surpassed for thousands of years. At its peak, it may have had a population of 80,000 people, making it larger than London until the 18th century AD. To put that in perspective, Uruk housed more people than many modern American cities, and this was 5,500 years ago, in what is now the Iraqi desert. But the size of Uruk was only the beginning of what made it extraordinary. The city was protected by massive defensive walls that extended around the urban center for 6 miles. These were not simple dirt ramparts thrown up in haste for protection. They were sophisticated fortifications built with precise engineering calculations. In some places, the walls were 40 feet high, constructed from millions of mud bricks manufactured to exact specifications and assembled using techniques that ensured structural integrity around the entire perimeter. Within the walls, Uruk was laid out according to a master plan that showed an understanding of urban planning principles modern city designers would recognize and admire. The city was divided into different districts, residential areas with houses of various sizes to accommodate different social classes, commercial zones with workshops and markets, administrative areas with government buildings and archives, and religious districts dominated by massive temple complexes that rose over the Mesopotamian plain like skyscrapers. The streets were paved and laid out in a logical grid that facilitated traffic flow and trade. The city had sophisticated drainage systems that prevented flooding and carried waste away. There were public buildings, parks, and even what appeared to be early forms of public libraries, where clay tablets containing literature and technical manuals were stored for public access. But perhaps most impressive was the infrastructure that supported this enormous urban population. The Sumerians designed an irrigation system that brought fresh water from the Tigris and Euphrates rivers to the city through a network of canals, locks, and distribution channels that supplied each neighborhood. They developed sewage systems that removed wastewater without contaminating their water sources. They built storage facilities capable of maintaining enough food supplies to feed 80,000 people year-round. Recent archaeological work using ground-penetrating radar and satellite imagery has revealed even more astonishing details about the construction of Uruk. The city was built with a level of mathematical precision that rivals modern engineering. Buildings were aligned with astronomical observations with such accuracy that it suggests the use of advanced surveying techniques. The main temple, the Anu Ziggurat, was positioned to track the movements of celestial bodies with incredible precision, serving as both a religious center and an astronomical observatory. Dr. Margaret Van Ness, who has excavated at Uruk for more than 30 years, describes the city's engineering sophistication as virtually impossible for its time period. She notes that the construction techniques used at Uruk demonstrate knowledge of structural engineering, hydraulics, and urban planning that would not appear again until the Roman Empire more than 3,000 years later. What is truly remarkable about Uruk, Dr. Van Ness explains, is not just its size, but the fact that it was clearly planned and built as an integrated system. This was not a settlement that grew organically over centuries. It was designed from scratch by people who understood complex principles of engineering, architecture, and urban planning. The level of coordination and technical knowledge required to build something like this should have taken centuries to develop. Yet the Sumerians seem to have achieved it within a single generation. Modern engineers studying Uruk's construction have identified techniques that were previously thought to be much later innovations. The Sumerians used standardized measurements and modular construction methods that allowed for rapid expansion and modification. They had quality control systems that ensured uniformity over large distances. They understood principles of load distribution, foundation engineering, and structural integrity. These are concepts taught in modern engineering schools. Perhaps most astonishing of all, they did all of this without any of the tools we consider indispensable for large-scale construction. There is no evidence of pulleys, cranes, or other mechanical devices that should have been necessary to move and position the massive blocks used in their buildings. Yet somehow, they managed to construct structures that have withstood one of the world's harshest climates for more than 5,000 years. Now, let's talk about perhaps the most important and mysterious Sumerian invention: writing. The development of writing is usually described as a slow, evolutionary process that takes thousands of years. It typically begins with simple pictorial symbols that gradually become more abstract and eventually evolve into systems capable of representing complex ideas and sounds. We can trace this evolution in various cultures around the world. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Chinese characters, and Mesoamerican glyphs all show clear evidence of gradual development from pictographic origins. The Sumerians, it seems, were not given any instructions about taking their time. Their writing system, cuneiform, appeared around 3,300 to 3,200 BC, not as primitive scratches or simple pictographs, but as a sophisticated system capable of recording everything from epic poetry and complex legal contracts to mathematical equations, astronomical observations, medical procedures, and international diplomatic correspondence. From its very first appearance, cuneiform was already capable of handling multiple languages, abstract concepts, philosophical ideas, and technical specifications. To appreciate how remarkable this is, consider that the earliest cuneiform tablets found at sites like Uruk and Jemdet Nazar already show a writing system with hundreds of different signs, complex grammatical structures, and the ability to represent abstract concepts with no visual counterpart. This is not the sort of simple record-keeping system you would expect from people just learning to write. It is a fully developed literacy system that rivals anything produced by later civilizations. Dr. Katarzyna Szmiel of the University of Chicago, who recently deciphered a 4,400-year-old tablet containing a previously unknown Sumerian myth, describes the complexity of their writing system as virtually impossible for its time period. The tablet she translated tells the detailed story of the storm god Ishkur and displays literary techniques like foreshadowing, character development, symbolic imagery, and complex narrative structure, techniques that would not reappear until classical Greek drama. What is extraordinary about this tablet, Dr. Szmiel explains, is not just the sophistication of the story it tells, but the way it tells it. The author uses advanced literary techniques that show a deep understanding of narrative psychology, character motivation, and symbolic representation. This is not primitive storytelling. It is sophisticated literature that can stand beside the greatest works of any civilization. But the truly strange thing about Sumerian writing is this: from the very beginning, they did not use cuneiform merely for practical purposes, like record-keeping or business. Some of the earliest tablets we have contain complex theological debates, sophisticated mathematical calculations, detailed astronomical observations, and philosophical texts grappling with fundamental questions about existence, morality, and the nature of reality. It is as if the Sumerians sat down one day and said, "Let's invent writing so we can preserve our advanced knowledge for future generations." But this raises a troubling question that has puzzled scholars for more than a century. Advanced knowledge of what? Where did their sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy come from? Recent discoveries have only deepened the mystery. In 2024, archaeologists working in Turkey discovered a cuneiform tablet exposed by earthquake damage at an ancient site. When translated, the tablet turned out to be an industrial production order containing specifications for the manufacture of thousands of identical products using standardized processes and quality control measures. The level of organizational sophistication implied by this single document suggests industrial capabilities that should not have existed for thousands of years. Another recent find, a cache of tablets discovered at Khirbet Kabur in the ancient Mesopotamian region of Iraq, contains texts describing advanced chemical processes that resemble instructions for creating synthetic materials and pharmaceutical compounds. When modern chemists analyzed the formulas described in these ancient texts, they found that many of them actually worked, producing the chemical effects described in the tablets. Dr. Irving Finkel of the British Museum, one of the world's leading experts on cuneiform, has spent decades studying these mysterious texts. The more we translate, he says, the more we realize that the Sumerians possessed knowledge that we ourselves are only beginning to understand. These were not simple people recording crude observations. They were sophisticated thinkers documenting advanced principles of science, mathematics, and engineering. The Sumerian writing system was also astonishingly adaptable. Within a few centuries of its invention, cuneiform was used to write not only Sumerian, but also Akkadian, Babylonian, Assyrian, Hittite, Hurrian, Elamite, and dozens of other languages in the ancient Near East. This versatility allowed the system to survive for more than 3,000 years, making it one of the longest-lived writing systems in human history. Perhaps most remarkable of all, the Sumerians understood the power of written language in ways that would not be fully appreciated again until the modern age. They created the world's first libraries. They founded elementary schools to teach literacy. They developed the idea that knowledge should be preserved and transmitted to future generations through written records. Sumerian mathematics is where things become truly strange, and where even the most skeptical archaeologists begin to scratch their heads. While almost every other ancient civilization used simple base 10 systems based on fingers and toes, the Sumerians developed a base 60 system that modern mathematicians regard as not just sophisticated, but, in many ways, superior to our own decimal system for many kinds of calculations. To understand why this is so remarkable, you need to know what makes base 60 so special. Our base 10 system works well for simple counting, but it becomes awkward when dealing with fractions and complex calculations. The number 10 is divisible evenly only by 2 and 5, which means that common fractions like 1/3 or 1/7 result in repeating decimals that go on forever. The number 60, however, is mathematically elegant to an almost uncanny degree. It is divisible evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This makes it incredibly versatile for calculations involving fractions, exactly what you need for advanced engineering, astronomy, commerce, and scientific computation. But what really baffles mathematicians is this. Developing a base 60 system requires an understanding of advanced mathematical concepts that Bronze Age farmers should not have had access to. You must understand relationships between numbers, the idea of mathematical elegance, the practical applications of different number bases, and the computational advantages of various systems. This kind of abstract mathematical thinking typically evolves only after centuries of mathematical development. Modern computer scientists who think professionally about number systems have confirmed that base 60 is actually optimal for many types of calculation. Donald Knuth, one of the world's leading computer scientists, has written that the Sumerians' choice of a sexagesimal system demonstrates a degree of mathematical sophistication that is truly astonishing for so early a civilization. Somehow they recognized mathematical principles whose advantages we have only recently come to fully appreciate. The Sumerians also gave us the 360-degree circle, the 24-hour day, and the 60-minute hour. These were not arbitrary choices made by people who didn't know any better. They are mathematically sophisticated decisions that create a consistent, integrated system for measuring time and space. For example, The 360-degree circle can be divided evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, 15, 18, 20, 24, 36, 40, 45, 60, 72, 90, and 180. This makes geometric calculations far easier than in most other systems. We still use Sumerian measurements today, 5,000 years later, because mathematicians and scientists have not been able to come up with anything better. Every attempt to replace them with more rational systems, like dividing the circle into 400 grads in the metric system, has failed in practical use. Recent analysis of Sumerian mathematical tablets has uncovered even more surprises that challenge our assumptions about ancient capabilities. They understood the Pythagorean theorem more than 1,000 years before Pythagoras. They could calculate square roots with impressive precision using techniques that modern mathematicians have trouble reconstructing. They had tables for calculating compound interest, loan payments, and complex financial transactions. Some tablets contain mathematical concepts that would not be rediscovered until the 17th century. Dr. Eleanor Robson of Cambridge University, who has studied Mesopotamian mathematics for decades, has found evidence that the Sumerians understood principles of calculus, worked with exponential functions, and even grasped ideas related to what we now call chaos theory. What is truly remarkable, Dr. Robson explains, is not just that they understood these mathematical principles, but that they applied them to practical problems. These were not theoretical mathematicians working in isolation. They were practical people using advanced mathematics to solve real-world problems in engineering, astronomy, commerce, and administration. Perhaps most striking, Sumerian math tablets show that they understood mathematical relationships in ways that require sophisticated analytical thinking. They were not merely memorizing multiplication tables. They were exploring mathematical principles and discovering relationships between numbers. This demonstrates a very high level of abstract reasoning. If Sumerian mathematics is impressive, their knowledge of astronomy is, according to everything we thought we knew about the development of ancient science, flat out impossible. The Sumerians created star charts that accurately mapped the night sky. They identified and named many of the constellations we still recognize today. They tracked the movements of the planets with a precision that would not be matched for more than 4,000 years, until the invention of the telescope. But what makes their astronomical knowledge truly mysterious is that they seem to know things about our solar system that should be impossible to observe with the naked eye. Sumerian tablets describe the colors of distant planets, the number of moons around the gas giants, the existence of planetary rings, and even planets that modern astronomy did not officially discover until the 18th and 19th centuries. How did they know that Uranus is greenish-blue at a time when it was barely visible as a faint star to naked-eye observers? How did they know that Saturn has rings, which are completely invisible without telescopic magnification? How did they know that Jupiter has multiple moons that cannot be seen without optical instruments? Computer modeling by NASA astronomers has confirmed that many Sumerian astronomical predictions are accurate to within fractions of a degree. Their calendar system, based on incredibly complex calculations of lunar cycles, was more accurate than the calendar we used until the Gregorian reform of 1582. Dr. Alessandro Berio of the European Southern Observatory, who has studied Sumerian astronomical texts for years, describes their knowledge as unexplainably advanced. After analyzing their star charts and planetary calculations using modern computer models, he reached a disturbing conclusion. Either they had observational tools that we have not yet found in the archaeological record, or they obtained their knowledge in ways that we do not understand and cannot explain through conventional archaeology. Sumerian astronomical texts describe observational techniques and mathematical methods that seem far too sophisticated for their supposed technological level. They understood concepts like the precession of the equinoxes, which require centuries of observation and detailed mathematical analysis of minute changes in star positions. They calculated the length of the year with an error of only a few minutes. They tracked planetary motion over multiple orbital cycles and predicted celestial events with a degree of accuracy that rivals modern calculations. Perhaps most mysterious, some Sumerian texts seem to describe astronomical events that modern science has only recently discovered or confirmed. Variable stars, binary star systems, supernovas, and other exotic celestial phenomena. Some passages resemble descriptions of phenomena that we now know require advanced physics to understand, such as gravitational lensing, stellar evolution, and even what might be early descriptions of black holes. Dr. Wayne Horowitz of the Hebrew University, who has been translating Sumerian astronomical texts for decades, has made discoveries that challenge our basic assumptions about ancient knowledge. The more we translate, he says, the more we realize that the Sumerians possessed astronomical knowledge that seems impossible for their time. They were not casual stargazers. They were sophisticated astronomers who understood principles of celestial mechanics that we ourselves are only now beginning to fully grasp. Recent analysis using advanced computer modeling has shown that when Sumerian astronomical predictions are projected forward with modern calculations, they remain astonishingly accurate across thousands of years. Their eclipse predictions, planetary position calculations, and stellar observations retain their precision even when extended far beyond the time period in which they were originally made. This level of astronomical sophistication raises profound questions about Sumerian civilization. Accurate astronomy requires not just careful observation, but advanced mathematics, precise record-keeping across many generations, and a theoretical understanding of celestial mechanics. The Sumerians seem to have mastered all of these requirements almost simultaneously. They accomplished in a few centuries what should have taken thousands of years of gradual development. The Sumerians were not only masters of mathematics and astronomy, they were also pioneering medical practitioners who developed techniques and possessed knowledge that would not appear again until the modern era. Archaeological evidence from recent excavations has revealed Sumerian medical texts describing surgical procedures, pharmaceutical preparations, and diagnostic techniques that demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of human anatomy and physiology, knowledge that seems impossible for people living 5,000 years ago. They performed cataract surgery with a precision that modern ophthalmologists admire. They set broken bones using alignment techniques still taught in medical schools today. They had treatments for more than 200 different medical conditions. When modern chemists and pharmacologists analyzed the pharmaceutical recipes described in Sumerian texts, many were found to be surprisingly effective for the conditions they were intended to treat. Dr. Mark Geller of University College London, who has studied Babylonian and Sumerian medical texts for years, describes their medical knowledge as astonishingly sophisticated and scientifically sound. He notes that many Sumerian medical practices show an understanding of principles that Western medicine did not recognize until the 19th and 20th centuries. But what is truly shocking about Sumerian medicine is that many of their texts reveal a detailed knowledge of internal anatomy that should have been impossible without advanced dissection techniques and systematic study of human physiology. They understood the circulatory system millennia before William Harvey described it in 1628. They wrote about the nervous system with a level of accuracy that suggests detailed knowledge of neuroanatomy. Some texts even seem to describe patterns of genetic inheritance and the role of heredity in human health. One recently translated tablet describes a surgical procedure remarkably similar to modern organ transplantation, complete with detailed instructions for preventing tissue rejection using plant-based compounds that modern pharmacologists have confirmed possess immunosuppressive properties. The text describes the procedure with technical precision that strongly suggests the authors were actually performing such operations successfully. Another fascinating tablet appears to discuss a form of anesthesia using carefully prepared combinations of plant extracts. When modern researchers analyzed the chemical compounds described in these ancient recipes, they found that the combinations would indeed produce the anesthetic effects mentioned in the texts, with dosage calculations that reveal a sophisticated understanding of pharmacology and human physiology. Dr. Annie Attia of the CNRS in Paris, who specializes in ancient Mesopotamian medicine, has made some startling discoveries in recently translated medical texts. What we are finding, she explains, is evidence that the Sumerians possessed medical knowledge that should have been beyond the reach of ancient peoples. They describe anatomical structures that cannot be observed without dissection. They discuss physiological processes that require an understanding of biochemistry, and they prescribe treatments that show knowledge of pharmacology and human psychology. Perhaps most remarkable, some Sumerian medical texts describe what we would now call psychosomatic medicine, the understanding that mental and emotional states can affect physical health. They had treatments for what they called diseases of the heart and mind, that included not only physical remedies, but also what modern doctors would recognize as early forms of psychotherapy. The Sumerians also understood principles of public health that would not be formally recognized until the 19th century. They had detailed regulations for waste disposal, water purification, food safety, and disease prevention that show a sophisticated understanding of how illnesses spread and how epidemics can be prevented. Recent excavations have uncovered what appear to be Sumerian hospitals, specialized facilities designed specifically for treating the sick and wounded. These buildings included separate areas for different medical conditions, specialized equipment for surgical procedures, and even what looked like early medical libraries where treatment manuals and case studies were stored. Dr. Joanne Scurlock of Elmhurst College, who has translated hundreds of Mesopotamian medical texts, has found evidence that Sumerian medicine was based on systematic observation and experimentation rather than purely magical or religious thinking. They were practicing evidence-based medicine, she says. They kept detailed records of treatments and outcomes, adjusted their approaches based on results, and developed therapeutic techniques through careful empirical observation. This is precisely the scientific methodology we see as the foundation of modern medicine. One of the most remarkable and mysterious aspects of Sumerian civilization was their education system. They established the world's first schools, called eduba, tablet houses. These schools operated with a level of sophistication and systematization that rivals modern educational institutions. These were not simple literacy programs or basic skills training centers. They were comprehensive educational systems producing graduates capable of managing complex civilizations. Samuel Noah Kramer's research revealed that Sumerian schools used standardized curricula that were astonishingly similar across different cities and time periods. Students studied mathematics, writing, literature, history, geography, astronomy, medicine, law, and what we would now call scientific methodology. The curriculum was carefully structured to build knowledge systematically, with advanced courses that took years to complete. What is extraordinary about Sumerian education is that these schools produced graduates who could function as international diplomats, conduct complex negotiations with distant civilizations in multiple languages, design and build massive construction projects as engineers, predict celestial events with remarkable accuracy as astronomers, and perform sophisticated surgical procedures as medical practitioners. Recent archaeological discoveries have revealed the incredible scope and sophistication of Sumerian educational institutions. Excavations at sites like Nippur and Ur have uncovered what can only be described as ancient universities, with specialized libraries, research facilities, and dormitories for students who had come from distant cities to study. The tablet collections found at these sites reveal a curriculum that covered virtually every aspect of human knowledge available at the time. Students received advanced training in mathematics, including calculations that modern mathematicians recognize as early forms of algebra and geometry. They learned multiple languages and writing systems, enabling them to communicate with peoples across the ancient world. They studied literature from not only Sumer, but also other civilizations, suggesting a truly international approach to education. Dr. Miguel Civil of the University of Pennsylvania, who has studied Sumerian educational texts for decades, describes the sophistication of their schools as almost modern in their systematic approach to knowledge transmission. He found evidence that Sumerian educators understood principles of pedagogy that would not be formally recognized until much later in human history. They understood, Dr. Civil explains, that learning requires a systematic progression from simple concepts to complex ones. They knew that students learn best when new material builds upon skills they have already mastered. They used techniques like memorization, repetition, and practical application that modern educators recognize as effective teaching methods. These were not people just figuring out how to educate their children. They were sophisticated educators who understood how human learning works. Perhaps most striking, Sumerian schools seem to have been truly international institutions that attracted students from all over the ancient world. Tablets found at educational sites include texts written in multiple languages and references to students from distant places like the Indus Valley and Anatolia. This suggests that Sumerian educational institutions had a reputation for excellence that drew students from thousands of miles away. Graduates of these schools went on to create and manage the complex systems that made Sumerian civilization possible. They became administrators who managed supply chains that stretched across continents. They were engineers who designed the irrigation systems that supported tens of thousands of people. They were diplomats who negotiated treaties and trade agreements with distant civilizations. They were scholars who preserved and transmitted knowledge across generations. Recent analysis of Sumerian administrative records has revealed the incredible complexity of the systems managed by these educated administrators. They tracked inventories across multiple cities, managed supply chains that spanned continents, coordinated construction projects employing thousands of workers, and maintained diplomatic relations with dozens of different cultures and kingdoms. Dr. Benjamin Foster of Yale University, who has studied Mesopotamian education for more than 40 years, has reached a conclusion he finds both impressive and surprising. The Sumerian educational system produced graduates capable of managing a level of civilizational complexity that would not be seen again until the modern era. They trained people to think systematically about complex problems, to manage large organizations, and to develop innovative solutions to unprecedented challenges. This raises a crucial question. How did they develop such sophisticated educational techniques so early in human history? This brings us to perhaps the most controversial and mysterious aspect of Sumerian civilization: their religion and mythology. Here, in their sacred texts and creation stories, we find potential clues to the most astonishing features of their culture and the extraordinary nature of their achievements. The Sumerians worshipped a complex pantheon of gods called the Anunnaki, who were said to have descended from the heavens in the distant past to establish the first civilizations on Earth. But before we dismiss this as simple, primitive mythology, we should consider something important. The Sumerians were extraordinarily practical and rational in every other aspect of their lives. Their legal codes were logical and fair. Their mathematical systems were elegant and efficient. Their agricultural techniques were scientifically sound. Their medical practices were based on careful observation and experiment. These were not superstitious primitives inventing fantastical stories to explain things they didn't understand. They were sophisticated thinkers who approached problems systematically, using reason and careful observation to solve them. So why did they consistently insist that their knowledge and civilization came from divine teachers who descended from the sky? According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were beings with advanced knowledge and technology far beyond anything available to humans at the time. They were described as possessing flying craft capable of traversing great distances, powerful weapons that could destroy cities, devices that could move massive stones, and the ability to manipulate life itself in ways eerily similar to modern genetic engineering. What is especially interesting about the Sumerian descriptions of the Anunnaki is that they do not portray them as all-knowing, all-powerful, perfect beings. Instead, they are described as having very human personalities and problems. They get drunk, they quarrel among themselves, they make mistakes, and sometimes regret their decisions. They are not depicted as gods, in the traditional sense, but as beings with superior knowledge and abilities who nonetheless have recognizable personalities and limitations. The Anunnaki were organized in a complex hierarchy, with different individuals responsible for different aspects of civilization. Enlil was lord of the air and storms, responsible for weather and agriculture. Enki was master of water and wisdom, responsible for technology and human welfare. Inanna was goddess of love and war, responsible for human relationships and conflict resolution. Ninhursag was the mother goddess, responsible for fertility and childbirth. Recent translations of previously unknown tablets have revealed even more details about the Anunnaki, making these descriptions even more intriguing. Some texts describe them as coming from a place called Nibiru, interpreted by some researchers as another planet or a distant region of the world, where they established mining operations and production facilities and eventually created humans as a workforce to help with these projects. Sumerian creation myths describe the process of creating humans in terms that bear a striking resemblance to modern genetic engineering. Humans are described as being created by mixing clay with divine essence. Different types of humans are created through different mixing processes. The texts describe failures and successes in these creation attempts, suggesting an experimental process of development and refinement. Dr. Stephanie Daly of Oxford University, who has translated numerous Mesopotamian creation texts, notes that Sumerian creation stories are unusual among ancient mythologies in that they describe the creation process with detailed technical descriptions. Most ancient creation myths, she explains, are poetic and symbolic. Sumerian texts read more like technical manuals or laboratory reports. They describe procedures, list components, discuss experimental outcomes, and even mention quality control measures. Perhaps most importantly, the Sumerian texts do not treat these stories as mythology, in the sense we understand the term. They often present them as historical facts, complete with specific dates and locations. For example, the Sumerian king list describes rulers who lived for thousands of years and possessed superhuman abilities. Yet it records their reigns with the same matter-of-fact precision used for historically verified kings. This raises profound questions about how we should interpret these texts. Were the Sumerians recording real historical events that we no longer understand? Were they creating sophisticated allegories to preserve important knowledge? Or were they documenting encounters with beings or phenomena that do not fit within our current understanding of history? What is undeniable is that the Sumerians consistently attributed their advanced knowledge to non-human teachers. Were these teachers mythological figures, real advanced beings, symbolic representations of natural forces, or something else entirely? The truth is that the Sumerians developed abilities that seem impossible for their time period. One of the most intriguing and mysterious concepts Kramer discovered in Sumerian texts is something called ME, pronounced May. The ME were described as divine powers, or laws governing civilization itself. Everything from kingship and priesthood to craftsmanship and agriculture was controlled by specific ME. According to Sumerian mythology, these ME were originally located in the temple of the god Enki in Eridu and were later distributed to various cities and institutions across Mesopotamia. The famous story Inanna and Enki, which describes the transfer of the arts of civilization from Eridu to Uruk, tells how the goddess Inanna got Enki drunk at a banquet and persuaded him to give her more than 100 different ME, which she then took to the city of Uruk to establish civilization there. What is surprising and fascinating about the ME is that they are described less like abstract spiritual concepts and more like forms of technology or information systems. Texts describe the ME as things that can be transferred from one place to another, that require specialized knowledge to operate correctly, and that grant their possessors immense power over natural and social processes. Kramer himself was fascinated and puzzled by the concept of me. He wrote, "The exact meaning of the Sumerian term ME is still uncertain. It seems to refer to a set of rules and regulations assigned to every cosmic entity and cultural phenomenon, enabling them to function forever in accordance with the plans laid down by the deity who created them." The list of ME that Kramer was able to reconstruct from various texts contains more than 100 items, ranging from abstract concepts like truth and peace to specific technologies like metalworking and agriculture, as well as social institutions like kingship and priesthood. What is striking about this list is that it appears to represent a systematic analysis of everything needed to create and maintain a complex civilization. Modern researchers who have studied the ME concept note that it seems to function like a combination of natural laws, technological systems, and informational databases. Dr. Bent Alster of the University of Copenhagen, who has studied Sumerian literature for decades, describes the ME as a kind of divine technology that makes civilization possible. What is fascinating about the ME, Dr. Alster explains, is that they are described as containing both the fundamental principles and practical knowledge needed to make civilization work. They are not just abstract ideas. They are portrayed as functional systems that actually govern how things operate in the world. It is as if the Sumerians understood that civilization requires specific kinds of knowledge and technology, and they conceptualized this understanding as divine gifts that could be transferred from one place to another. Recent analysis of Sumerian administrative texts has revealed that the ME concept may have had practical applications beyond its mythological significance. Some tablets refer to guardians of the ME, officials responsible for maintaining certain aspects of civilizational function, and to transfers of ME that seem to describe the movement of technical knowledge and expertise from one city to another. Did the ME represent an advanced form of knowledge or technology passed down to the Sumerians by their mysterious teachers? Was it a way of conceptualizing and organizing the complex knowledge required to sustain an advanced civilization? Or was it something even more extraordinary, an actual technological or informational system we do not yet understand? The mystery of the ME remains unsolved, but it highlights one of the most intriguing aspects of Sumerian culture, and one of the clearest indications that they possessed an astonishingly sophisticated understanding of civilizational complexity for such an early period in human history. The story of Sumerian studies is far from over. Even as we enter the third decade of the 21st century, new discoveries continue to add pieces to the puzzle and create new mysteries that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. In July 2025, Dr. Katarzyna Szmiel of the University of Chicago announced her translation of a tablet in the Istanbul Archaeological Museums containing a previously unknown Sumerian myth. The story recounts how the storm god Ishkur becomes trapped in the underworld and is rescued by a clever fox. But what makes this discovery so remarkable is not just the story itself, but the sophisticated literary techniques the ancient author used to tell it. This tablet, Dr. Schmiel explains, shows a level of narrative complexity that rivals anything produced by later civilizations. The author uses foreshadowing, character development, symbolic imagery, and psychological realism in ways that demonstrate an incredible understanding of human nature and storytelling technique. This is not primitive mythology. It is sophisticated literature created by someone who understood advanced principles of narrative art. That same month, archaeologists working in Oman announced the discovery of 5,000-year-old tombs that show clear evidence of contact with Mesopotamian civilization. The grave goods included objects that could only have been produced using advanced metallurgical techniques, and chemical analysis confirmed that some of the artifacts were actually manufactured in Mesopotamia and transported more than 1,000 miles to their final resting place. Dr. Sarah Phillips, who led the excavation, described the implications of this discovery. What we are seeing is evidence of trade and cultural exchange networks far more sophisticated than we believed possible for this time period. The level of coordination and logistics required to maintain these long-distance relationships suggests organizational capabilities that should not have existed for thousands of years. In March 2025, researchers analyzing ancient Mesopotamian administrative tablets announced the discovery of what they called the empire's spreadsheets. These documents reveal bureaucratic systems of extraordinary complexity and sophistication, with detailed records of resource management, personnel tracking, and logistical coordination across vast territories. Dr. Amanda Podney of California State Polytechnic University, who has studied these administrative texts, describes them as more sophisticated than the bureaucratic systems used by many modern governments. These records reveal, she explains, that Sumerian administrators were managing supply chains that stretched across continents, coordinating construction projects employing thousands of workers, and maintaining diplomatic relations with dozens of different cultures and kingdoms. What is remarkable about these administrative records is not only their complexity, but their efficiency. These people developed management techniques and organizational systems that modern business schools would recognize as advanced principles of management and logistics. Perhaps the most intriguing recent discovery came in August 2024, when a major earthquake in Turkey exposed a previously unknown cache of cuneiform tablets at an ancient site. When archaeologists were able to access and translate these tablets, they found something extraordinary: detailed instructions for what appear to be industrial-scale production processes. The tablets describe manufacturing techniques for creating thousands of identical products using standardized procedures, quality control measures, and supply chain management. They include specifications for tools and machinery, instructions for training workers, and even what look like early forms of industrial automation using mechanical devices. Dr. Lorenzo Verderame of Sapienza University of Rome, who translated these tablets, describes their content as impossible for the supposed time period. These texts, he explains, describe production processes that require an understanding of metallurgy, chemistry, engineering, and organizational management that should not have been available to ancient peoples. And yet here they are, written in cuneiform on clay tablets, completely authentic and undeniably ancient. Each new discovery adds new pieces to our picture of Sumerian civilization, but also raises new questions about their abilities and origins, creating new mysteries that challenge our understanding of ancient capabilities. The more we learn about them, the more mysterious they become, and the harder it is to explain their achievements using conventional archaeological theories. After spending more than 60 years studying Sumerian civilization, translating thousands of tablets, and training a generation of scholars who continue his work, what was Samuel Noah Kramer really telling us about this mysterious people? Kramer was first and foremost a careful scholar who believed in letting the evidence speak for itself. He was fascinated by Sumerian achievements, but he avoided making sweeping claims about their origins or implications. His core message was both simple and profound. The Sumerians were far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined, and their impact on human civilization was incalculable. But Kramer also acknowledged the mysteries his research had uncovered. In his later writings, he admitted that many aspects of Sumerian civilization remained unexplained and might never be fully explained using traditional archaeological approaches. He was particularly puzzled by their advanced knowledge in fields like mathematics and astronomy, noting that their capabilities exceeded what should have been possible given their supposed technological limitations. In my later years, Kramer wrote, the more I learned about the Sumerians, the more questions I found myself unable to answer. Every tablet I translated revealed new abilities, new knowledge, new achievements that pushed the limits of what should have been possible for people of their time. These were not primitive people slowly inching toward civilization. They were sophisticated thinkers who understood principles that we ourselves are still trying to fully grasp. Kramer's great achievement was to show that the roots of human civilization are far deeper and more sophisticated than we had previously believed. He demonstrated that the foundations of everything we consider civilized, writing, law, education, science, literature, urban planning, were not established gradually over thousands of years, but rapidly and systematically by a people who seemed to know exactly what they were doing and why. But Kramer also left us with profound unanswered questions. How did the Sumerians develop such advanced knowledge so quickly? Where did their sophisticated understanding of mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and engineering come from? Why do their own texts consistently attribute their achievements to non-human teachers? And what can their example teach us about human potential and the true origins of civilization? These questions have become even more pressing as new discoveries continue to reveal the full extent of Sumerian capabilities that challenge our basic assumptions about ancient peoples and their limitations. Every new tablet translated, every new site excavated, every new technique applied to analyze ancient remains seems to make the Sumerians more remarkable and more mysterious. As we conclude this journey into the world of ancient Sumer, we are left with the same fundamental question that has puzzled researchers for more than a century. How did they do it? The Sumerians achieved in a few centuries what conventional archaeology says should have taken thousands of years. They developed sophisticated knowledge and technologies that would not be matched for millennia. They created a civilization so advanced that we are still trying to understand how it was possible. And they did it at the very beginning of recorded history, when humans are supposed to have had no prior experience with complex civilization. Were they simply extraordinarily intelligent people? Did they make rapid advances through sheer human genius? The evidence suggests that, while they were certainly brilliant, their achievements exceeded what should have been possible even for exceptionally gifted humans. Did they inherit knowledge from earlier, unknown civilizations? Recent discoveries at sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey show that sophisticated cultures existed much earlier than previously believed. But even those earlier cultures do not display the kind of systematic, comprehensive knowledge the Sumerians possessed. Were they guided by superior teachers, as they themselves constantly claimed in their own texts? This is perhaps the most controversial possibility, but it is also the one the Sumerians themselves insist is true. Their texts do not present the Anunnaki as mythological figures, but as historical beings who actually taught humans the arts of civilization. Or is there another explanation we have not yet considered? Perhaps the Sumerians represent a form of human achievement we do not yet fully understand, a demonstration that, under the right conditions, human intelligence and creativity can accomplish things that seem impossible from our current perspective. The truth is, we may never know exactly how the Sumerians accomplished what they did. The evidence they left behind tells us much about what they achieved, but very little about how they achieved it. They seem to have taken their extraordinary abilities in mathematics, astronomy, engineering, and social organization for granted, as if these were simply natural parts of human knowledge. But perhaps this is the most important lesson we can learn from the Sumerians. They did not see themselves as primitive people struggling against impossible odds. They saw themselves as intelligent beings capable of understanding and controlling their world through knowledge, innovation, and systematic thinking. In that sense, perhaps the Sumerians were not so different from us. They were people who refused to accept their limitations, who believed that knowledge could overcome any obstacle, and who devoted themselves to building something better for future generations. They proved that human potential is far greater than we usually imagine and showed us that civilization, knowledge, and innovation are not accidents of history, but expressions of humanity's deepest aspirations. Were they guided by gods, taught by advanced beings, or driven solely by their own extraordinary intelligence and determination? Whatever the answer, the Sumerians achieved something extraordinary. They created the first human civilization worthy of the name, and they did it so well that we are still using their innovations, still learning from their discoveries, and still trying to understand how they accomplished so much so quickly. The mystery of the Sumerians continues, and perhaps it always will. But the inspiration of their achievements remains as powerful today as it was 5,000 years ago, when they first began laying the foundations of human civilization in the fertile valleys of ancient Mesopotamia. Samuel Noah Kramer devoted his life to understanding this remarkable people, and his work opened a window onto a lost world that continues to fascinate and astonish us. The tablets he translated, the stories he recovered, and the questions he raised have given us a glimpse of human possibilities we are still struggling to fully comprehend. As we continue to excavate their cities, translate their texts, and analyze their achievements with ever more advanced techniques, one thing becomes increasingly clear. The Sumerians were not just another ancient civilization. They were the civilization that showed humanity what it could become. And their legacy continues to inspire us to reach for achievements that may seem impossible, reminding us that if we have the vision, the knowledge, and the determination to pursue it, human potential is far greater than we can imagine.